Good morning, everybody. I hope you're able to see my screen, our screen, and Alan and I, we are doing this talk. I will start by providing some context about debates in higher education as far as online assessment is concerned. And then we will focus on the findings and evaluation of a project that was led by CD, by the Centre for Distance Education at the University of London. And we will focus on the integrity, academic integrity aspect of this project. And then we will finish with some reflections and considerations about supporting integrity, academic integrity in an online and distance learning context. Can I please ask you to mute your microphones if you're not speaking? It can be a bit distracted. Thanks a lot. Okay, right. Moving to the next slide. So what happened in 2021? Just to give you a brief account about discussions in relation to online assessment. So as in 2020, in 2021, universities continued readjusting their assessment strategies, modifying their assessment strategies to address the challenges imposed by the move to online assessment. Probably in 2021, there was a bit of a more measured approach, if I could put it this way, because university higher education providers had the advantage of going through the first year of the responses to the pandemic, and their approaches were more measured, and because they had the experience of what worked and what did not work. There was a big focus on security of digital assessments, and additional measures were taken to ensure the security of digital assessments were taken into account. And this happened in some providers immediately, or there was a gradual approach in other providers. I was reading a very interesting article today about a big survey that was run by Wiley in the US, and it indicated that there was a drop in terms of concerns as far as educators, academics were concerned about plagiarism and academic integrity. And the drop was about 60%. So 93% of these academics were very concerned about academic integrity in 2020. And in 2021, this went down to 77%. And there are quite a lot of reasons about that. Another characteristic of the debates in 2021 was an increasing appetite of distance learning students for online assessment. And this echoes very much the findings of our evaluation, and Alan will give you a good glimpse of that. What the COVID-19 showed was a need for more flexible assessment methods. But beyond the flexibility, as far as the pedagogy was concerned, and flexibility is part of the pedagogy as well, there was a need for more authentic real-world assessments at scale. What's happening at the moment is that, as far as these debates are concerned, many institutions are planning a permanent move away from traditional exams and using online assessments more. And there is evidence from research about some of the key advantages for staff and for students. And as far as staff is concerned, there is the advantage of focusing more on supporting students' learning rather than dealing with some of the problematic nature of traditional exams, which can be sometimes, in some institutions, in some contexts, exercised in memory. As far as the students are concerned, and I will focus on a big advantage, not because it's a current trend in higher education to be talking about mental health, but it's quite important, particularly for the context of the distance learning students to indicate that the move from traditional exams has had important mental health benefits. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Stylianos. So we're reporting today in part on issues that have come out of the evaluation from 2021, but also in a way on the evaluation that took place in 2022. So we're reporting on the themes that come out of these two evaluations, which we've conducted for the University of London in successive years. And the first thing to report is that the University of London's international programs work in 180 or so countries. So there's enormous variety of context and environment that our students meaning the students in the University of London and all its partner universities who use the international system, enormous variety in the environments and contexts that they are able to study in and take exams in. But there was really no evidence that students were not able to take their exams. Hello? I hope I'm still there, am I?
Yeah, you are. No.
Good. There's no evidence that students felt excluded from their examination because of moving online in 2021, any more than they did in 2020, actually. And they also very broadly felt they were able to demonstrate their learning. So from the student perspective, move online didn't exclude them from their exams and therefore from their qualifications, nor did it diminish their ability to demonstrate their learning. In 2021, there were fewer challenges for students with the technology which they had to use. So the University of London had improved its systems, although obviously locally, I think there were still some challenges with broadband and et cetera. But broadly speaking, we believe the digital shock has diminished in 2021 as against 2020. So we have this phenomenon of the advance of digital culture all around the world. And that's partly about the practicalities. So the University of London, which like all universities in the UK was in a state of shock when lockdown happened in 2020, had become much more confident about what it's doing. Program directors managing the academic side of the assessment and the teaching and learning had also become more confident, and students had become more confident. So the shock that we felt was evident in 2020 was much diminished in 2021. And in fact, so much so that neither with students nor with program directors was there any reported wish to return to what was happening in 2019, the traditional model of face-to-face exams, the University of London model, which has stood so well as a guarantee of qualifications and standards for 150 years. There is actually very little reported wish for people to go back to that. And so what we met with a number of program directors was that this pandemic had accelerated the rethinking of assessment strategies. What was assessment for? How was it best organized? How were we going to manage examining skills as well as knowledge? So it's really set in train a process which is very much still underway, and in which I think Stylianos and I would say is entirely a positive thing. But lastly, on a more challenging note, 2021 sees a continuing major concern about academic integrity. A number of program directors reported that the results Am I still there, Stylianos?
Yes.
You're back now. You're a bit sideways, Alan, but that's okay.
There was a bit of a breakup, but we can hear you now.
Yeah, I obviously got signal problems this morning. See, the results were not as different from 2019 in 2021 as the ones in 2020 were. So there's some evidence that program directors and the University of London were managing out some academic integrity issues, but that wasn't true for all programs. Some programs continued in a state of very considerable concern about academic integrity. So academic integrity remains, if you like, in the middle of the desk as a major issue for the move to online assessment. Can we move to the next slide, Stylianos? So just in brief, in 2021, just over 30,000 students were surveyed with something like 7,000 responses, which we believe is a good response rate and allows us to talk to you today. We've got some evidence, in other words. We had interviews with 16 students, We surveyed 590 examiners with 124 responses, and we were able to interview 8 program directors, not as many as we would have liked, it must be confessed, but program directors are very busy people. And once again in 2021, we made our major focus on student experience. And I'll just speak to my last slide, Stylianos, if you'd be kind, and just pull out some of the major themes. Before I hand back to Stylianos. So the major themes we think coming out of our 2021 evaluation is that there are limits to the threat to academic integrity from technological solutions. There's some resistance from some student groups and some program directors to online proctoring. And I think very little confidence that online proctoring in the near future is going to provide the solution for authenticity of the person taking the exam. So that doesn't look like a major line of advance in the medium term, as far as we can tell. We do think that there's a big impetus to innovation in assessment practice, which I just mentioned, which we think is a positive thing and is underway. So we can't report to you where the outcomes are going to be. Of course, they'll be very varied from a whole lot of programs. But there is an impetus to innovation. There's a lot of rethinking about what assessment is supposed to do and how you can organize it. But at the same time, more of a challenge reported by program directors that there is constraint on their side in terms of staff resource for assessment redesign. I mean, so much so that while on-campus versions of the same qualification have rethought their assessment strategies, colleagues don't have time or resource to do that for the international programs, which are delivered online and at a distance. So we have something of a mismatch sometimes between the assessment strategy for campus-based and international programs. And also reported and requested indeed was a need for further professional development by program directors to think their way through with colleagues from a range of different universities about how they can redesign assessment. And there was one quotation from a program director, which I think is worth just highlighting. And she said, we offer online programs, we should be able to offer assessment online. So it's really a firm statement of intent that if we're working online, we're working online and we have to solve the problems and not go back to where we were. So I'll hand back to you, Stylianos, at that point.
Thanks, Alan. So we are not attempting to give you a crash course on academic integrity, but just to remind you about the key considerations, the key components of the notion of academic integrity. So academic integrity is related to 6 very important values that need to be demonstrated in the behavior of our students: honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. And academic integrity is commitment, even in the face of adversity, to these 6 fundamental values. So academic misconduct refers to the practices that are not in keeping with these values and this commitment. There are 2 dominant approaches to managing academic misconduct in the sector. The first one has to do with promoting creative assessment, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And creative assessment is a type of assessment that enhances authenticity, inclusivity, validity, reliability. All of these are very important considerations when designing assessment in the 21st century. And also, this comes together, or in addition, a complementary aspect of this approach A is guidelines to students about expectations of institutions around reference to plagiarism. The second one is more techy. So it has to do with technological management and practical safeguards. Things like moderation of assessment, online invigilation. There's been quite a lot of discussion about the use of proctoring, online proctoring systems. And there are quite a few examples out there, software systems that are led by or that have been developed by private companies in the private sector, and institutions are using text matching software, which is very important, I think, as a providing a technological reassurance to academics about the behaviors of the students. And also other things like, which is not practical scale, things like vivas to verify student academic work. So these are the two approaches, approach A and approach B. Together, today, we focus on approach A because we believe without downgrading approach B as a non-important approach in managing academic integrity, we believe that the emphasis on approach A is quite key in promoting and supporting academic integrity in higher education. So, what was characteristic in 2021? On top of everything, we had new forms of threats of conduct cheating. I don't know if you have come across Chegg, quite a big threat, and other SMEs, private companies that are happy to sell to students answers to demand and provide answers that the students have ordered online. As far as Alan mentioned that already, as far as our evaluation is concerned, there were varied increases in academic offenses in 2020 and 2021. Is still a key consideration. Sometimes it seems to be discipline specific. We talk to program directors, and some of the program directors, particularly from humanities, social sciences, believe that with the use of open book exams, academic integrity is not, academic offense is not a big worry, it's not a big concern, because by designing an exam, the exam content appropriately, they can deter these kind of behaviors in the students, which is a very important consideration and links to the next kind of focus of this presentation about designing assessment to support academic integrity in online and distance learning. So I'm concentrating again on approach A and the University of London. So there were in 2021, in response to student feedback in 2020, there has been quite a dominant, visible strategy from the University of London in supporting academic integrity. It had to do with, and it has new resources to support academic integrity and well-being. And the intention was to contribute to students feeling better, prepared this particular year. So also there were greater levels of student training on academic integrity to avoid plagiarism, academic offenses, and collusion. This also included briefing to students at teaching centers about induction to online examinations with a big focus on academic integrity. I will just mention a few examples of that. There was a short course was developed for students and launched in March 2021. There was program-specific communication about online exams and generic guidance coming from the university as well. There were videos, yearly drop-in sessions, and Q&A sessions run by program teams. We supported this kind of aspect of making sure that the students become 100% familiar about what they can quote, about the format of online exams. There was a lot of discussion, lots of consideration about the submission window. Very briefly, the submission window is the window that the students have in order, from the point where they're downloading the assessment to the point where they upload the completed exam paper back onto the system. Also, another important consideration was the emergence and establishment of the open book format as a key format for supporting academic integrity in the distance learning context. So this approach A includes some key consideration about assessment design. We need to say that the University of London had a very successful traditional model for 150 years. This had to do with students going to exam centers to take in face-to-face examination. There are some other considerations that we need to take into account. I will give you an example. A program is run both on campus, but also off campus for distance learning students. And there is, as far as the student voice is concerned, a desire for consistency between the two approaches, running a program off campus and on campus. There is a consideration for retaining an open book exams format beyond the pandemic as a quite a sensible, pedagogically valid format for supporting academic integrity. There is a desire by the students to retain typed in and not handwritten scripts. There is a consideration, there is a desire for the students as far as evaluation is concerned to keep shorter windows for open book exams. And because these seem to have a positive impact on integrity. There are debates as well whether this exam will be taking place at an exam center or at home. And our students, the University of London students, seem to, by quite a big percentage, 77% of the respondents in 2021 and 66% of the respondents in 2020 believe that agreed that they would like to see online assessment, online exams to continue in the future. And the big advantage that they see has to do with traveling, cost, and security. Back to Alan.
Thank you, Stylianos. So just moving, Shoshi, just to reassure you, moving fairly quickly towards the end now. Out of all this, we pulled together a small number of recommendations which have gone in our report back to the University of London. We think that there's a strong case for, and indeed a welcome for, continuing professional development on redesigning assessment to deal with the threat to academic integrity, and indeed on redesigning assessment for pedagogic purposes also. And I know that that's under active consideration in the certificate certification at the moment. So we think CPD will be an important support to this assessment redesign process which is going on. And that CPD might well include a review of how students are inducted into the online exam process and allowing us to share examples around academic integrity issues and communication issues across universities. So we think there's a strong case for CPD about redesign. So that's the kind of first pillar of what we've been saying. And the second pillar is that clearly the management of academic integrity issues is a matter for continuing concern. And we think, again, CPD should be able to support that with guidance for examiners and further training for us all in the use of Turnitin and other software packages. So those are, in brief summary, the recommendations we have. And if we can just go to the last slide, Stylianos, just to rehearse some of the conclusions that Stylianos and I have mentioned during our contribution this morning. The shift to online assessment is supported by the majority of students. So students like it. They might not have liked the COVID pandemic, none of us have, but they like this shift. We think there's a significant case for redesigning assessment so that it's fit for purpose for an online environment. And we don't think that process has gone far enough yet. We've kind of stumbled into it in 2020. We think it's accelerating in 2021. There's a lot more to be done. So there's a drive to innovation, and indeed a drive to innovation, not just from inside the University of London and its partners, but also the Office for Students, directing us to make sure that assessment is inclusive and is meaningful. So there's a lot to be done in making assessment practice for our international programs more contemporary. And the fourth bullet point, the students were less concerned about the impact of online assessment on the opportunities for cheating and on any threat to their qualifications. That lower level of concern by students wasn't shared by all program directors at all, but the students are not majorly concerned about this. But we also think, last of all, that the open book assessment phenomenon, which we think is a positive one, needs to be more consistently delivered. And in fact, the longer times, 1 or 2 programs went for as long as a week for an open book exam, actually seem to have caused students stress. So having a more consistent approach to shorter windows for open book assessment, we think is a positive way forward. And that, I think, is the end. And I think our last slide says thank you from Stylianos and me. And we hope to listen to your comments and questions.